take that tray back to the kitchen. And use the service door next time staff don't walk through my foyer." Vivian Sinclair said it loudly. That was the point. A room only works as an audience if it can hear. Ruth Hayes was 63 years old. She had cleaned other people's houses for 41 of those years, and she knew, the way some people know weather, exactly what a room thought of her the moment she walked into it. She set the tray down on the side table. She did not flinch. She did not answer. She had learned a long time ago that the people most eager to make you small are usually the ones most afraid of being small themselves. It was Christmas Eve. Snow had started at 6. By 7, the windows of the big house on Linden Hill were gold from the inside, and the curved driveway was full of cars worth more than the whole street Ruth had grown up on. She picked up the empty tray. She walked back toward the kitchen through the service door because she had been told to. What Vivian Sinclair did not know, as she turned back to her guests and laughed at something a man in a gray suit said, was whose house she was actually standing in. And by midnight, that one missing piece of knowledge would cost her everything she had spent her whole life pretending to be. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen smelled of clove and orange and the slow heat of an oven that had been running since noon. Ruth moved through it without hurry. She had spent 41 years in kitchens like this one, grander and meaner, kinder and worse, and her hands knew the work before her mind named it. She rinsed. She stacked. She wiped a ring of red wine off the marble before it could set, because she had learned the difference between dirt and neglect a long time ago. Dirt lifted. Neglect set into the grain and stayed. She wore a plain wool dress and the same low black shoes she had worn to every job for 9 years, because the leather was still good, and she was not a woman who threw away a thing that still had use left in it. She was the kind of woman who returned a borrowed pen, who wrote thank you notes by hand, who had never once, in 41 years, taken so much as a sugar packet from a house that wasn't hers. She had raised one son alone. Her husband, a quiet, decent man named David Sinclair, had died when the boy was 4. Ruth had buried him on a Thursday and gone back to work the following Monday, because grief did not pay rent, and the boy needed shoes. She cleaned houses by day. She took in pressing and mending by night. She had skipped more meals than she ever told anyone about, so that her son would never learn to think of hunger as something normal. The boy's name was Daniel. And Ruth did not know it yet, standing there in that warm kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder, but her son was 40 minutes away, stuck on a runway in the snow. And the night was about to teach this whole bright house something it had forgotten how to know. The reception had been Vivian's idea, the way most things in the house were Vivian's idea. 40 guests. A string trio in the front room. The board, the donors, the 3 or 4 families whose names opened doors in this city. Vivian had hired extra staff through an agency for the evening, and when a plain older woman in a wool coat had arrived at the side gate at 2 that afternoon, carrying a worn canvas bag, Vivian had looked at her for exactly 1 second, decided what she was, and pointed her toward the kitchen. "You're the extra they sent." "Good, we're behind. Coats go in the blue room, and please don't speak to the guests unless they speak to you first." Ruth had opened her mouth. Then she had closed it. She had looked at this young woman in the doorway of the enormous house, looked at the way she held herself, the way her eyes had already finished with Ruth, and moved on. And Ruth, who had spent 4 decades reading rooms the way other people read print, decided to read this one all the way to the end before she said a single word. So, she put on the apron. she did the work. And she watched. The first hour was small things. A snapped finger across the room when a glass ran low. A correction, delivered to the air near Ruth's head rather than to Ruth herself. Not that platter, the silver one. Honestly, Ruth absorbed each one the way she absorbed everything, quietly, without announcing what it cost. The coat was the moment it turned. A guest arrived late, shaking snow from a heavy camel coat, and Ruth stepped forward to take it, because that was the work. Vivian intercepted her in front of 6 people. "Let me." Vivian took the coat from Ruth's arms with a small, performing smile. "You'll get it damp. These hands have been in the sink all night." A light laugh. The 6 people laughed too, because that is what people do. "We do try," Vivian added to the room, "but you can't teach polish. It's either in someone or it isn't." Ruth stood very still. She did not throw the dish towel. She did not raise her voice. She did not say the 4 or 5 true things that rose up in her and pressed against the back of her teeth. She set the towel down on the side table, folded once, the corners square. Then she noticed something, and she filed it away without reacting at all. On the far wall of the foyer, in a slim brass frame, hung a photograph of a young man in a graduation gown with his arm around an older woman in a blue dress. The older woman was her. The photograph was 22 years old. No one in the room had ever once looked at it closely enough to recognize the face now standing 6 feet beneath it. Ruth turned. She walked back toward the kitchen through the service door, because she had been told to. The only person in that house who treated her like a person was a young woman on the catering staff named Lena. Lena was perhaps 20, with careful hands and an accent from somewhere south, and twice that evening she had quietly taken the heaviest tray out of Ruth's grip before Ruth could lift it. The second time, she had said, "Lo, you sit for a minute. I'll cover the front." Ruth had thanked her. Lena had said, "My grandmother worked rooms like this. I know what the feet feel like by 9. Ruth had filed that away too, but gently, the way you set down something you intend to pick up again. The year before all of this, none of it would have seemed possible. Daniel Sinclair had not been born into the kind of money that throws receptions for 40. He had been born in a 3rd-floor walk-up with a radiator that knocked all winter. He had watched his mother leave before dawn and come home after dark, and he had learned early that there was a particular tiredness that lived in her shoulders, and that the only thing that ever lifted it was him doing well. So he did well. He did very well. He built a logistics company out of a single rented truck and a notebook of routes, and 14 years later it moved freight for half the state. The first thing he did, the very first thing, before the house and the cars and any of it, was create a scholarship. He named it for his mother. The Ruth Hayes Foundation funded tuition for the children of domestic workers, cleaners, caregivers, the women who raised other people's families while their own waited at home. By that Christmas Eve, it had put 1,400 students through college. Its winter reception, the one Vivian was chairing, was its most important night of the year. Daniel had married Vivian 4 years earlier. She was clever and beautiful and frightened in a way she would never admit. Frightened of being thought common. Frightened the way only people who clawed their way up from the edge of something ever are. She had told her circle that Daniel came from an old family, very private. She had told them his mother was not well enough to travel. Sadly, it was easier than the truth, and Vivian preferred easy stories about herself. She had never met Ruth. Daniel had tried, more than once. Each time, Vivian had a reason, a trip, a deadline, a delicate season at the foundation. Daniel, caught between the woman he loved and the woman who had given him everything, had let years slip the way decent men sometimes do, telling himself there would be time. This Christmas, he had decided there would be no more waiting. He had called his mother in November. He had said, "Come for Christmas. Stay through New Year. It's time Vivian knew you." And Ruth, who had wanted this for 4 years and asked for it never, had said yes. He had not told Vivian the date. He had wanted it to be a gift. That was the thing Vivian had never understood. Until now. Ruth understood the whole shape of it slowly, the way you understand a house you're cleaning room by room. It was Lena who gave her the first piece, without meaning to. They were standing in the pantry restacking glasses, and Ruth asked her how she'd come to the work. Lena said it was just for the holidays. She was a student, 2nd year, engineering. It's a scholarship that covers most of it, she said, for people like us. The Ruth Hayes Foundation. That's actually whose party this is. Tonight's their board. She said the name with real warmth. I always wanted to meet her. Ruth Hayes. They say she raised her son alone, cleaning houses. They named the whole thing after her. Lena smiled. I think about her sometimes when it's hard, like somebody understood. Ruth held very still in the pantry with a glass in each hand. She set them down. She walked, slowly, back to the foyer, and she looked again at the brass-framed photograph she had filed away an hour before. The young man in the gown, her arm around him, her blue dress. The plaque beneath it, which she had not let herself read the first time. Read, Daniel and Ruth, the day the work paid off. And then she saw the rest of the shape of it, the way she would see a whole house at the end of a long day. Every room at once, every connection between them. This was her son's house. These were the people who funded the scholarship that carried her name. The young woman who had been ordering her through the service door for 6 hours was the woman her son had married. And the photograph that proved exactly who Ruth Hayes was had been hanging on the wall the entire night, 4 feet from the head of every guest who had laughed. Ruth did not gasp. She did not sit down. Something moved through her chest. And it was not anger, exactly, and it was not grief, exactly. It was the very specific quiet of a woman who has just understood the whole structure of a thing and is deciding, carefully, what to do with the knowing. She had a choice. She could end it with 1 sentence. She could turn to the room, point to the photograph, and watch the floor open under the young woman who had handed her an apron. It would take 10 seconds. It would be easy. She didn't move fast. That is the part people never understand. If she had wanted fast, it could have been over before the coats were hung. 1 sentence. Done. But Ruth had spent 41 years learning that the truth of a person is not what they show the people who matter. It is what they show the woman holding their coat when they believe no one important is watching. She had not yet seen the bottom of who Vivian was, and she had raised a son to value the truth over the easy story. She owed him the same care. So she waited. She finished her trays. She let Lena take the heavy one. She watched Vivian move through the rooms like a woman who already owned the evening, refilling her own importance from the attention of the board, certain the night was hers. Certain there was no one in the house with the power to change that. At 9:40, Vivian gathered the room for a toast. She stood by the tree. She raised a glass and spoke about the foundation, about the woman it honored, the name behind it all. Ruth Hayes believed, Vivian told the board, that dignity isn't given to you. You earn it. She let the words land. She had read them off a card at the gala in October, and they had gone over well. So she used them again. We don't just write checks here. We see people, a few feet away, in an apron, holding an empty tray, the actual Ruth Hayes, watched Vivian Sinclair tell 40 of the city's most important people that she saw people. Vivian believed the evening was already won. That was exactly where it needed to be. At 10 past 10, the front door opened, and snow came in with the cold, and Daniel Sinclair stepped into his own foyer 4 hours late, still in his travel coat, scanning the room for the one face he had flown across the country to bring home. He found it. He stopped. His mother was standing by the kitchen door in a borrowed apron, holding a tray, her good wool dress half covered by it, her shoulders carrying that particular tiredness he had spent his whole life learning to lift. For one long second, Daniel did not move at all. The room had not noticed him yet. The trio still played. Vivian, mid-sentence with a donor, had not turned around. He crossed the room. He did not hurry, and he did not slow. He walked the way Ruth had taught him to walk into hard rooms, which was straight through the middle of them. He stopped in front of his mother. He took the tray out of her hands and set it down on the nearest surface, the way you set down a thing you mean to be finished with. And then, in front of the board, the donors, the families whose names opened doors, Daniel Sinclair took off his coat, put it around his mother's shoulders, and said, into the quiet that was beginning to spread out from him like a ring in water, "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my mother. Ruth Hayes, the woman this foundation is named for. The reason any of us are standing in this room tonight." The trio stopped, not all at once. The cello held a note a half-second too long and then let it go, and after that the silence was complete. Vivian turned around. Her face went through several things very quickly, and none of them was an emotion she had time to choose. There was the bright reception smile, still half-formed. There was the small confusion of a person hearing words in the wrong order. Then there was recognition, the slow, terrible arrival of it, as her eyes went from her husband's face to the older woman beside him, the woman in the apron, the woman she had sent through the service door, the woman she had told you can't teach polish, the woman whose name she had spoken into a microphone 20 minutes ago to make herself look generous. Her glass was still raised. She had forgotten it was in her hand. Ruth looked at her. She did not gloat. There was nothing in her face that wanted Vivian to suffer. That was the thing that made it unbearable. "You asked me to use the service door," Ruth said. Her voice was even and quiet and carried to every corner of the silent room. "I've used a great many service doors. Vivian, 41 years of them. I never once mistook the people inside the houses for less than they were." She paused. "I had hoped, by now, you'd have learned to do the same." She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The room did the rest. A board member near the window set down his drink. Lena, by the kitchen door, had both hands pressed over her mouth, and her eyes were full. Because the woman she thought about when it was hard was standing 8 feet from her in an apron, and had been all night, and Lena had been the only one in the house to take the heavy tray. Daniel turned to her. In front of everyone, he said, "Lena, you looked after my mother tonight, when no one else did. I won't forget it. Neither will the foundation." Lena could not speak. She nodded. Daniel did not raise his voice at his wife. He did not list her cruelties for the room. He looked at Vivian for a long moment, and what was in his face was not rage. It was something quieter and far more final. "Get her coat," he said softly. "Not the service door. The front. She's a guest in this house. She always was. It did not happen all at once. There was no scene after that, no shouting, no broken glass. The reception simply ended the way air goes out of a room. Guests found their coats and their cars and their reasons to leave. The board chairman shook Ruth's hand at the door, both of his around hers, and said he was ashamed, and meant it. By midnight, the big house on Linden Hill was quiet, and the snow kept falling, and the gold went out of the windows one room at a time. In the weeks that followed, the consequences settled the way water finds its level, not dramatically, just steadily. Vivian was asked, by the board she had chaired, to step down from the foundation's leadership. No one was cruel about it. They simply stopped calling. The galas went on without her. The families whose names opened doors found, somehow, that their schedules no longer had room. She had spent 4 years building a position out of other people's regard, and she had spent one evening showing those same people exactly how she treated someone she believed had nothing to offer her. They had been watching. They did not forget. The marriage did not survive it, not because Daniel was vengeful. He was not. It was simpler and sadder than that. He had finally seen, in one clear hour, who his wife became when she thought the only person watching was a tired woman in an apron. And a man cannot unsee the thing he has spent years choosing not to look at. They parted without war. Vivian kept her own things and her own name. She did not keep the life that had only ever belonged to the house. Ruth did not move into the big house. She tried it for a week, for Daniel's sake. And then she told him, gently, that she liked her own small place with the radiator that knocked, where her shoes lined up by the door and her thank you card stood in a cup on the desk. He understood. He always had. She did one thing, though. She let her son drive her to the foundation's office that spring, and she walked into a room full of people who funded the work in her name, and she let them shake her hand. And she did not wear an apron. Lena was there. Lena had been given a paid internship and a quiet promise that the rest of her tuition was the foundation's concern now, and not hers. She hugged Ruth for a long time and did not let go quickly. 14 months later, on a bright cold morning, Ruth Hayes sat at the kitchen table in her own small place with a cup of tea going cool in her hands and a stack of letters in front of her. They were from students. The foundation forwarded a batch every month now, because Ruth had asked to read them. She read each one all the way through. She wrote back to every single one by hand, the way she had always done everything, the corners square, the work finished. On the windowsill above the sink sat a small framed photograph that had hung, for years, in a foyer she had only stood in once. A young man in a graduation gown, his arm around a woman in a blue dress. Daniel had taken it down from the big house and given it to her himself. She kept it where she could see it while she worked. She picked up the next letter. She turned it over. She read the first line, and something loosened in her chest that she hadn't known was clenched, and she reached for her pen. Cruelty always believes it knows exactly who it's talking to. That is its oldest mistake, and its most expensive one. Be careful how you speak to the woman holding your coat. The world has a long memory, and the people we treat as nothing have a way of turning out to be everything. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.